going to talk to you for a little bit about how projects get funded, some of the processes that the application goes through, and the people involved. I wish I could tell you exactly how projects get funded, because then we'd all be much happier. But this is really just to give you some guidelines. And in a way, it's a funny place to start to go to the end to think about the funding process, but it might help you to bear in mind kind of what you're aiming for. And as Sophie has already talked about, how important it is that you're communicating your ideas, and these are the people you've got to communicate to. So I'll start off talking a bit about the processes involved. And again, Sophie has already hinted at some of those. So sort of putting in a grant application, submitting it is a bit like a game of snakes and ladders. And there are various checkpoints where you can suddenly leap forward, or unfortunately, potentially kind of slither back to the beginning. And most funders will have some or all of these stages. So the first one, as Sophie mentioned, is this thing that's sometimes called the initial scrutiny, where this won't yet go to some kind of scientific panel, but there will be a group of people who literally look at your form that you have submitted and check various details about that. So if you manage to make it through that initial scrutiny, you will then, at various points, your application will be seen by subject experts. There may well be methodological reviews by people like me, who's a statistician, and there may be reviews by members of the lay public. And these may be done in various different formats, and that may be by panels meeting together to discuss. It may also be by sort of people providing written reviews, and those things will all combine to produce a view of your work. So I'm going to talk about some of those panels a little bit later. So first of all, scrutiny. What do these funders look for? As Sophie had mentioned, that actually you are in remit for the funder that you have applied to, whether that is you personally or your organisation, or whether the content of the work that you are suggesting is in remit for them. So, for example, NIHR don't fund animal research. So if you put in a proposal that does include that, they will just automatically reject it because it isn't part of their remit. So do be careful that you fit that. They will also look for something fairly basic about the completeness of your form. So whilst that seems fairly obvious, do check that you have completed absolutely everything. Sometimes you find that this work is submitted via a portal that gathers together information from different places. So you have to be sure that you have fulfilled all of that. And they will do a very initial check of what they call competitiveness. So it may be that they can see quite quickly that something about your work doesn't look quite right or doesn't look competitive. So even though they're not a scientific panel, they may well take a view not to take your application any further forward. So obviously you need to try and convince even this at this early stage that your work is worthwhile and is indeed competitive. So hopefully your application will make it through that initial stage of scrutiny, which means that you will then have your works sort of discussed at various types of panel. So I'm going to talk about those types of panels, the kind of people who sit on them, and what the procedures are. And you may be familiar with this, but they may not work quite the way you think. So hopefully you'll find this useful. So some funders have something called a prioritization committee. And then at that, they are looking less potentially about sort of the methods that you're going to use and how you're going to deliver the work. And they're really just interested in the topic. Is it a priority topic? Is it an important topic that this funder wants to fund? So is it important to them? You will then have a committee that really is looking to commission the work. So saying, yes, is this what we want to spend our money on? And sometimes these panels are called advisory committees. So they do come under slightly different names, but between them, they will decide, is the work important? And secondly, is it important enough for us to actually pay out the money for it? So the kind of people who sit on your panels, they will generally be a variety. This is particularly true of NIHR, whose panels are really quite broad in the expertise that are there. So hopefully you will see what these represent. So first of all, we have doctors, medics, and other clinicians. We also have health economists. So that is represented by the money. And in the middle, the black and white picture is a chap who was identified as student from the student's t-test. So he represents the statisticians on the panel and other methodologists. You will also get GPs and perhaps surgeons. And in that bottom corner, that represents the public contributors who sit on all NIHR panels. So the implication of this is that you have a really wide audience and they all need to be able to understand the work that you are presenting to them. And a key feature also of these panels is that you will have a variety of expertise, but there's no guarantee that someone on that panel will have specific subject knowledge for your area. So that means you won't necessarily have someone who's able to say, yes, I can confirm that this is hugely important. So your application needs to do all of that persuasive element to let a potential group of people who don't really know about your area to understand its importance and why the work should be funded. And we'll keep coming back to that point about the sort of the general nature of the reviewers who will be looking at your work and how important it is that your work can therefore speak for itself. Sadly, the few of you who thought that projects might be discussed for an hour or more will be disappointed because generally these projects don't get anything like that, which is very disappointing when you think how much effort you will put into writing these applications, that in the moment at the panel, the discussion possibly won't be very long. So it might be 10 minutes, it might be a little bit more or a little bit less. And part of that is what I'm going to explain in the panel procedures, that really you have different groups of people who serve different functions in a panel. And often what is done is that there is a role called a lead assessor, and that's often a couple of people within the wider panel whose job it is to present particular applications. So they may have already made a decision about the kind of score that they will give the application. They'll have read the application thoroughly, and they will then present the key points of the application to the rest of the panel. They may well present external reviewer comments if those are available. And they're really quite highly influential because they set the tone of the discussion that comes afterwards. So if they're there saying, oh, I really like this, it's a really important topic, that sets the tone for the discussion that follows on. The rest of the panel members are what we might call speed readers. So they may have looked very much at the lay summary, and we'll talk about the importance of the lay summary, the plain English summary later on today. And they may have skimmed through the rest of the application, but not in great detail. If, for example, like me, they're a methodologist, they may have looked very specifically at the statistical methods to check that they agree with what's being proposed and can comment on that part. So they may pick and choose a bit which part of the application they focus on. And really, the point of the discussion that happens is to come to an agreement efficiently. So it isn't to have a leisurely scientific discussion about your work. It really is to come to be an efficient panel that says, what are we thinking? Can we make a fairly quick decision as to yes or no about this application? And the chair has a role in that. So the chair will summarise the discussion, try and give a sense of what the room at large are thinking about this. And that may be to kind of try and direct people to say, it looks like we're all reasonably supportive of this application. It might be to say, it sounds as though there are quite a lot of concerns about this application. Does anyone want to, talk the application up? So they will try and direct how the rest of the panel are thinking and judging that application, and they are trying to facilitate agreement. So that's the key thing to take away, really, about how panels work. So there are a couple of types of panels. The first, if you have a two-stage process for your particular funding scheme, the first panel will be looking to just shortlist. And so they might have guidance as to a proportion or number that they can aim to take forward. And that is, partly about workload management, how many applications they can reasonably assess at the next stage, and also that they don't want to waste researchers' time by shortlisting them if they think there's very little chance of them being funded ultimately. And at a stage one, they may well put more weight on the importance of the research question and the scientific merit, rather than potentially the absolute nitty-gritty of the finer details of the application. And they aim to give useful, constructive feedback at that time, ready for anyone who's shortlisted to stage two. So at stage one, you really have to get across how important your work is, and for the panel members to sort of feel your vision for the work. At the stage two panel, this is where it gets a bit more serious, and they're thinking about, will we put our money where our mouth is and actually part with funding for this proposal? Again, they might have guidance as to how many projects they actually have the funding to take forward and award funding to. They'll give particular attention to how any feedback they gave from stage one has been dealt with. And at this stage, they will look much more closely at the importance of the topic to them as a funder, the value for money, the team and the team's ability to deliver, and the scientific merit of the work plan, and whether you're really able to answer the research question and whether you're going to be able to realise impact. So not surprisingly, it's a much more detailed review at stage two. Also involved in the process, but not necessarily sitting in that sort of committee room, are external reviewers. So work may well be sent out to individuals to say, please, will you review this work? And that review then feeds back into the discussions that the panel members make. But these external reviewers will just normally give written comments. And usually they are a combination of methodologists, as I say, like me. Then you will have your clinical or your subject area experts. And again, there'll be public contributors who also provide written reviews. And so this might be the only opportunity where a directly relevant subject expert will comment on your proposal. So it does mean that your work has to stand up to that really robust review from someone who really knows your area and knows what they are talking about, alongside other groups of people who won't know your area so well, but will be looking from their perspective, whether that's sort of the methodology or just looking at the sort of general importance to the public. So thinking a bit about all the people who are involved in this process. So it's useful and hopefully encouraging to remember that all of these people are real humans. Just like you, they'll be researchers. and they will mostly know what it's like to have written an application. So usually, particularly the members who sit on the actual panels, will be people who are very familiar with that funding scheme, may have applied to it themselves. So absolutely, they understand how much work and commitment it takes to write funding applications, and they'll have expertise, but as we've said, not necessarily in your subject area, and they will know what it is the funder is looking for. And often the start of a panel meeting will start off with some kind of briefing from the chair about that funder, about what they're looking for in particular at the moment, whether they have particular emphases of things that they are interested in. So reviewers will very much have that in mind. I would say also that reviewers do want to do a good job. They do want to make sure that what they can stand by, that their own reviewers would hold up to scrutiny, and they don't want to get it wrong. So they are trying to do a good job for you. The other things to know about reviewers is that they'll be busy people just like you are, and they may not have very much time to devote to your proposal, unfortunately. They will start forming an opinion of your application straight away. And that's where things like, unfortunately, little errors, little typos early on can make a difference in terms of people's general impression. So obviously there are lots of tools you can use to help you with that, but people do, it's almost inevitable, it's human nature to start making an impression as soon as you get to page 1. They may also have many other applications that they will be reviewing alongside yours and that will be in competition with you. So often what a reviewer will do is they will head straight to your plain English summary and potentially the scientific abstract, and they will be delighted if that is really clear, concise, complete, and is also accurate to the work that comes next. So you will help them a huge amount, even if the English summary isn't, the plain English summary isn't just for the public contributors. It really is for all the reviewers, and it really helps to orientate them as to the work that's coming next. And you'll probably be bored by the end of the 3 days of us going on about how important the plain English summary is. So I've started. So there you go. They will look for the rationale and the justification for all aspects of the study to be provided in the application. So hopefully reviewers don't need to assume what's going on and won't be expected to have prior knowledge of the area. So you will need to give sufficient detail for them to understand all of that. They will look particularly to check that the aim of your study, that you are able to answer that those match up, that your research plans really do tally with the aims of what you're trying to deliver. As I've said, they'll have in mind the remit of the funding stream, and they will judge the strength of the proposal on the strength of the writing to a degree, as I've mentioned before. And often they will think in terms of fixable faults and fatal flaws. So fixable faults might be the things that you then get committee feedback on. So that will be things that they think it's reasonably straightforward to address without sort of needing to completely rethink your whole proposal. And fatal flaws, unfortunately, will be things where they just think, we couldn't fund this in its current state, and the applicants might need to go back to the drawing board. What I would say, unfortunately, is that reviewers will struggle if it's just taking them too long to understand your proposal. So I have been in panel meetings where people have said, I just didn't really understand what it is they were aiming to do. So just, again, this is about clarity and being really, really as clear and trying to help your reviewers understand your work. So reviewers will expect that they can kind of visualize your project plan. So part of that is how you present it as neatly and cleanly and logically as possible. They will need to be convinced of your work, that your work is necessary and this is the right time for it. They can see the benefit of the work. They can see what your work will provide, how it will move knowledge on, and that they can see what impact or benefit might be realised down the line. And they also need to be persuaded that your team can deliver that work. So some of this is about deliverability as well as, you know, how great the idea is. And they will also expect the costs to be justified. So a few things that reviewers might struggle with is that they really don't want to make sense of your kind of your brain dump of information, particularly in the background section. So whilst it might be tempting to put in as absolutely as much information as possible with, you know, many references, really what they want is something that's a nice streamlined argument for your work. They also don't want to read lots of dense text, so thinking about literally how your work is formatted is quite important. I have heard someone in a panel talk about a blizzard of acronyms. NIHR is itself full of acronyms, but do try and avoid them or remind your reviewers of what they all mean from time to time, particularly if you have a lot of them. And some reviewers do struggle with typos and grammar. That's probably because they're, you know, the pedants among us. But do try and, you know, keep those to a minimum if possible. And obviously there's software to help with that. Reviewers also don't want to feel stupid themselves and feel too much out of depth. So I would suggest don't try and blind with science. Being just clear and keeping explanations as simple as reasonably possible is better. On the other hand, try not to patronise. And just think about guiding your reader through your work. Make sure you've got a logical flow and an argument. If what you're doing is particularly novel or is unusual, panel members can feel a bit at sea with that, particularly if it's an area that's very much at the sort of edge of their expertise themselves. So do give assurances, either through references, through people who have used those methods before, even if it's not very common. And finally, of course, test out your proposal. Often when we've been so deep in writing something, we can't see the wood for the trees. So do test out your proposal on colleagues, on your friends and family for the plain English summary. And of course, please do use the research support service, because that is exactly what we are here for.